I'm looking forward to providing you a bit longer overview of our topic for this week. We're talking about positive behavior supports. So rather than looking at mistaken behavior so much, we're going to focus a bit more on the behaviors we want to see. General overview, we're going to talk for a bit about teacher expectations and how what I believe actually can create both strengths and challenges for students. Prevention strategies, so ways to prevent or stop mistaken behavior from occurring in the first place. How to teach appropriate behaviors, because a lot of times if we're focused on giving a consequence for the behavior, the problem behavior that we're trying to help correct, they don't know what to do. We can't just say, don't do this. We have to show them do that instead, right? And teach them and practice that with them. We're going to determine the functions for behaviors and then ways to start positive behavior supports. Self-fulfilling prophecies, this is something that a lot of people know intuitively, but it really comes from some great psychology studies, including individuals like Rosenthal, and you'll be able to watch the short video of this old classic experiment. But it's where we often get what we expect because we end up acting in ways that create good behaviors or bad behaviors or whatever we're expecting. So we hold a belief about something, and it's usually not conscious, but we work to prove ourselves right. So if I believe, oh, this child is a real behavioral challenge, I'm going to be doing things a lot of times without even knowing it to support that child having behavior problems. It seems very contradictory. Why would we do that? But we very much like to be right. So once we have an opinion about something, we tend to do things to keep that opinion. And so it's not actually the child and their disposition that's creating things a lot of times, but it's our expectation about what we expect from that child. Let's talk about a few prevention strategies. One is to avoid the triggers. So once I've noticed what might be the trouble spots, it might be lining up for recess, or it might be during circle time, we can figure out strategies to help support that, maybe do it a little bit differently for a while. We can modify our instruction. One thing I've noticed a lot when students start struggling with behavior, teachers are not using developmentally appropriate practice, or we talk about DAP. They might have the children at 3, 4 years old trying to sit at circle for 10 or 20 minutes, and it's just too long, right? They need much more movement and activity. And so we might want to look at things that we could teach or teach differently or do differently when we're working as teachers to support students better. And then providing structure. So those things that we've already started doing, making those picture schedules and using them, having a very consistent routine and day, having consistent discipline is all going to help. So when we're teaching appropriate behaviors, we need to remember that punishment doesn't show how to behave differently, right? It tells them what we want them not to do, but not what to do instead or how to do it. So we want to teach and practice those things. We can pull up books and lessons and materials to work on teaching social skills or self-management or calming techniques or coping skills when they're easily frustrated. And this should be part of our lesson plans and activities with the students we work with. When it comes to rewards, one of the things, again, it's easier to notice challenging behaviors than to notice when everything's going right. So we need to start training ourselves to do much more rewarding of all the great behaviors that we're seeing every day, including with a student that might be struggling more often. So we want to catch students doing well. And the most effective rewards are those personal, our students want to be loved and cared for by us. So that could be giving really positive feedback and talks to them and their families, giving high fives, letting them know how awesome we think they're doing. We can do little things like sticker charts or prizes as well, but they're really overused, and ultimately being told by someone that, we're doing an awesome job and we're really proud of them, especially little ones, they want to hear that. They want our approval. So with behavior support plans, the focus is on what we can do to support the child, okay? We want to begin with their strengths, and we can work with others to figure that out as well at times, but every student has amazing qualities and characteristics, things that they're good at or that are special about them, so we want to build on that. So for instance, maybe a student really likes being a leader. That might not work well all the time, but that could be a great incentive as well to help them. They can be the teacher helper, things like that. We want to figure out the context, that is, where and when and during what times or circumstances are the problems or the struggles occurring. And we want to figure out the function or the why of their behaviors. So are they trying to escape something, get our attention, take control of things? Maybe they want a tangible reward, right? They want that toy that another child's playing with. So we need to figure out why they're doing particular behaviors. And one strategy, we call it FBA, functional behavioral assessment. So we're trying to figure out the function of the behavior. And we can do that through simply an easy way to remember it is an ABC chart. So we're going to track what's the antecedent, what happened before the student had the behavior that we're working to stop or correct. So the antecedent means what happened before the behavior. So what is the behavior? Are they, every behavior has a reason, right? And then the consequence. So did they get rewarded or did they get consequences after they did this behavior? Obviously, if they got an effective consequence, we would expect the behavior to decrease, but we might still have to show them how to do or what to do that's positive instead. And if it's rewarded, even inadvertently, it's like the child screaming in the store that they want candy, and then the parent gives them the candy, right? Well, they've just learned, okay, the antecedent is, oh, they're walking through and they see the candy. The behavior is they start screaming and crying for it. And the consequence is getting the reward or getting the candy from the parents. Absolutely, they're going to be more likely to do that again, right? Here are a couple examples. So Joey's asked to come to circle time. The teacher provides a physical prompt to show him, it's time to move to the group. Joey starts crying and hits the teacher. So that's the antecedent. He was asked, the behavior is crying and hitting. And the consequence, the teacher moves away from Joey and tells him to select a different activity. So did she just reinforce crying and hitting? She did, right? The function was to avoid circle and his behavior was reinforced. So we'll expect that to happen again in the future. Here's another example. Evan's playing with Duplos. He tries to attach a block to a stack of 3. He can't quite get the blocks to connect. He looks up at the adult and begins fussing. He holds the stack of books up, looks up at the books and at the blocks rather, and the adult, and then the adult helps him put the blocks together. So we'll think about the antecedent, what was happening, what was his behavior, and then what was the consequence. So the antecedent, or what was happening before, he was playing with his blocks, but he couldn't connect them. So the behavior, he fussed. It's hard to know what that means, but he's looking up at the adult and holding up the blocks and looks at the block and the adult. And the consequence is the adult helps him put it together. So he knows that looking up, fussing, holding up the blocks is getting adult support, and he would likely maintain that behavior as well, right? His function was to get help and it was reinforced. When we're doing behavior support plans, it's somewhat related to things we've done in previous weeks. We know that we have to monitor that. So this is when we're going to keep track of whether or not what we're doing is actually helping. If we don't monitor and make sure to check in, I prefer with other teachers or with a group like MTSS, a maximum, especially with little ones, I would say of once every 2 weeks. And we need to monitor to see if it's working or not, and having a team to support that. We want to think about what changes we can have to the environment to support their behavior changes. That might be the physical environment where they need more of a quiet space or some downtime, or they need more of that picture schedule. And it might be how I'm behaving. Am I rewarding or giving compliments for the behaviors that I'm liking? Am I teaching enough of what to do instead or how to replace that behavior when they start feeling frustrated or getting ready, right, to be triggered? So positive behavioral supports is about, right, it's a positive approach to changing children's behavior. It's based on Maslow's work. We'll go back and look at that on the next slide. It's an approach for understanding why a child has challenging behavior and then making sure the positive piece is how do we teach the new skills to replace that. And it's a holistic approach. So it considers the child, the family, their behavior, and maybe, if there are any disabilities or other things happening that are factors in the child's behavior as well. So this work ties back to Maslow. I believe you've learned a little bit about Maslow in the past, but he's a psychologist that's a humanistic. Whoops, sorry, I'm going to go back. Humanistic psychologist. And what the humanistic psychologist, what that means is it's a very positive view of children and adults. So even if someone is having mistaken behavior or struggles with different behaviors, it's a belief that we all want to do better and do more for ourselves. So no one is a bad person. We want to make sure that their basic needs are being met, but then all children want to be loved and belong. All children want to achieve more and do more. Okay, so we want to make sure basic needs are being met, but we know that it's a very positive belief that we can help children do much better. And that's ultimately what they want as well. So the old way of dealing with student behaviors really had to do with giving a general intervention or consequence. It's very reactive, right? Oh, you did this. Think of parents when they get mad, they spank the bottom, right? It's focusing on the quick fix. How do we get it stopped right now? We know that we want to look at the purpose of their behavior, because if a child is having a mistaken behavior, maybe because they're hungry or wet, that's very different than how we should approach if a child is acting the same way and it's because you know, someone just hit them or something else happened. So we want to be proactive, meaning figuring out what's happening in the environment ahead of time so we can help avoid triggers and start teaching new responses. And it's more long term. We have to remember, especially with little ones, even adults have a hard time using their words, right, to communicate when they're angry or frustrated sometimes. We have to remember that uh, hitting or yelling or any of those behaviors, they're trying to communicate something, and the less they have language to be able to express themselves, and that takes time and practice and years of growth, um, they're going to communicate in ways other than language. So instead of the language, it could help, or it could be a child with limited social skills, or they've learned that by doing this particular behavior, they will get more of their needs met. Challenge behavior works. Children engage in challenging behavior because it works for them. It results in them getting something they want or avoiding something that they want to avoid. So we can communicate in many ways. It can be through words or sentences, but it might be pointing, eye gazing, crying, screaming, pulling, biting, tantrums. There's lots of ways that children communicate. So these positive behavior supports teach new ways to respond, right? It supports new behaviors through things that we can change in what we're doing and teaching and what we're supporting in the environment. And it builds on their strengths and really focuses more on the positive changes and less on the behavior concern, other than trying to change around the environment to help decrease the likelihood of that behavioral concern and teaching some positive skills. So when we look at the step, one would be a team. And if you're in a preschool, that team might be a couple other teachers sitting with coffee at the end of the school day, but figuring out what goals we want for our team. We're going to gather information. That's that ABC chart, or that functional behavioral assessment. Let's figure out what's happening before the behavior, what's happening, what is the behavior, and then what's the consequence. Because if it's not decreasing, we know that the consequence is supporting that behavior still. Sometimes it's hard to look at on your own, so having a director or another teacher pop in for a few minutes, or even recording with permission from the director just for your own eyes to see what you might be doing or missing, can really help with that. You're going to make a hypothesis, your best guess of why the behavior is occurring, and then based on that, you're going to come up with a behavior support plan to support new behaviors and to try to do some modifications to maybe teaching or the environment to support more positive behaviors. And then you're going to monitor that. I mentioned maybe every couple of weeks max. You can't monitor every day, and sometimes it's going to take more than 3 or 4 days as well, because children are learning the new routine, the new structure, the new things that we're teaching them. But more than 2 weeks, and it's it's a little too long. We want to try something else if it's not working. So for your assignments this week, there's going to be a discussion, as always. This week, I want you to think of that ABC chart, and I gave an example already in for myself, but think of the function of your own behavior. So there might be a time where you want to avoid stress, or you're feeling exhausted and not wanting to do schoolwork. So what's the antecedent, what's the behavior, and what's the consequence? And then what would you do to support replacement behaviors or positive behaviors for yourself instead? Again, I gave my own personal example within the discussion, so that should help a bit. And then you're going to create, this is a key assessment. It is required for everyone in 103 across colleges and across campuses as well. You're going to watch a short video of a student, and then you're going to have a bunch of questions to answer in really creating, they call it a behavior response plan, and it's really a behavior support plan as well. Sometimes you'll see behavior intervention plan or positive behavior support plan. They kind of switch around the terms, but it's ultimately the same thing, where you're answering questions on what you see, what you could do to support the child better, and so on. It doesn't give a page limit. Just make sure for those, I think ultimately by the end, there's 6 different questions. I would answer each of them as thoroughly as you can. And I would think around 2 pages would be some full responses. But don't worry if you're a little bit over 2 pages or a little bit under 2 pages, but you just want to make sure that you thoroughly answered each of those questions. And those are your assignments for this week. I look forward to another week with you, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.